Tonight our special guest is Sally Anderson. Sally relives a terrible event in her life and tells us how she coped and changed her life. Part of the process was founding Evolve Leadership. Sally is a remarkable lady and a great example of taking a misfortune and creating a positive. Sally Anderson, welcome to The Beat Goes On.
Privileged to be here.
You have leadership courses, don't you, Sally?
Correct.
And it's called Evolved Leadership, is that
That's
correct?
Yep.
How did it all come about? Let's go back to the beginning. You're a Kiwi. You can tell by your lovely moko. Is that how you pronounce it?
Moko, yep.
Moko. Wow. So tell us about your Kiwi heritage. Let's get that out of the way first.
How long have we got?
We've got 3 hours.
Yeah. So my father was a guidance counsellor in the schooling system, very passionate about kids who weren't academically minded to succeed, and he was frustrated with the schooling system. So my first legacy leader was my father, somebody who had foresight and wanted to better the youth. He was frustrated with the system. So from my earliest memory...
So you were listening to all this through osmosis?
I am my father's daughter. So he actually took us to Canada when I was about 2, and so I was born in New Zealand, in Tokoroa, and then we went to Canada, and he wanted to excel in his guidance counselling. Spent 4 years in Canada, came back to New Zealand and was brought up in Ohope Beach in the Bay of Plenty.
Wow.
Beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
And so I was a keen skier, so I learnt to ski on Whistler Mountain.
Yeah.
And so we joined the Whakapapa Ski Club, which is on Mount Ruapehu in the central North Island. And I don't know whether the viewers can remember when they got their first pay packet, and you could spend the money on what you wanted to spend it on versus what your parents wanted. So in the early 80s, everybody used to hitchhike, so I was a bit rebellious, so we decided to... I was hiring out skis at Roy Turner's, which was a very high-profile ski shop in Ruapehu at the time. So we hitchhiked into Taumarunui, a local township, and shot till we dropped in the likes of Taumarunui, as much as you can do. And,
hello, Taumarunui.
Yeah. And we decided to go into the local public bar. So I was 15, 16, and that was pretty...
So you snuck in?
Snuck in
Right.
with a girlfriend.
But girls do look a little bit older.
Yeah,
don't they?
true. I did look a lot older than what I was.
Yeah.
And what we didn't realise from the minute that we walked into the public bar, that we were being cased out by the mongrel mob.
Oh my God.
So the mongrel mob and the Black Power were quite prolific in the early 80s. So my bag went missing, and then my girlfriend went missing, so I went outside the public bar to try and find her. And a car pulls up with 8 gang members inside. I was thrown into the car. The level of terror that I felt at the time was indescribable.
Oh.
Over and above what I was experiencing, it was about the unknown about what was going to happen. They drove me around to the mongrel mob hangout in Taumarunui. For the next 10 hours, I was thrown onto a butcher's block like a sheep carcass and raped from every orifice for a period of 10 hours. Wow. It was one of the worst reported gang rapes in the history of New Zealand in the early 80s. I was then abducted and taken to the mongrel mob hangout in Te Kori. More than 100 mongrel mob members were involved. I literally died on the block. I was conscious throughout the ordeal. 3 men in the back, 2 driving. The rapes would continue on the drive through to Te Kori. And then they took me into the mongrel mob hangouts there. The rapes continued until I lost consciousness. At that time, the head of the mongrel mob was away. He arrived home and I'm the only one in the house. Obviously I'd been beaten black and blue, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and he asked me where I was from. He gave me clothes, he drove me back to Taumarunui, and then demanded petrol money. Didn't have much money on me at the time.
Gosh.
Yeah, and so I'm standing on the side of the road, it's 7 o'clock at night, and I went into where I was working and I asked them for money, gave him the money, he drove us off, and I'm standing on the side of the road in the middle of winter, having been away for a 48-hour period. I go back to where I was staying, I scrub myself stupid, having a bath. I wake up the next morning and I go to work acting like nothing had happened. I think when you've experienced something of a traumatic nature, there's a lot of shame involved.
Numb, don't you?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
You have to psychologically clock out. And obviously I'd been missing, so Roy Turner at the time called the police. And in the early 80s there was a lack of support for the victim. Felt like I was being accused of, well, you walked into the public bar, you hitchhiked that day. It was kind of like, what part do you play and what you attracted? which wasn't palatable at the time.
Yeah. Now, this is a big debate
Yeah, it
raging
is.
today, isn't it?
Is.
You know, it's still relevant, isn't
Yep.
it? Yeah.
Yep. My parents were called. What on earth do you say to your daughter?
Yeah.
They didn't know how to deal with it. And cut a very long story short, go back to school, act like it didn't happen. So there was no psychological support on any level. And so that proceeded into a 25-year life sentence. So I did a 60-minute documentary back in 2004, and I met one of the perpetrators on camera. And the main reason why I did that documentary, I spoke into, there's many theories around the area of forgiveness. But the only person who loses out of the inability to forgive is the person who can't forgive. So there was a 2-day incident, I'd added 25 years, I became my own worst perpetrator, even worse than the mongrel mob, to myself. So self-hatred, self-loathing, the level of revulsion that I felt for myself, the most horrendous inner critic, 24/7 high volume, couldn't turn it off. For 10 years of my life, I would be asked every day, are you a man or a woman? Because it wasn't safe to be a woman, and I exuded so much masculinity. It was like, what does it mean to be a woman? Just putting a dress on, obviously, doesn't cut it. And so, and because of the depth of my voice, so I have been questioned throughout my entire corporate career. Or questioned on my sexuality. And yet the irony, you know, when you explain why you have such a deep voice, when you've screamed beyond the comprehension of screaming, and that you receive so much oral abuse that it damaged your vocal cords, people go, okay. So it's been interesting in the corporate arena when you do, you know, keynote presentations. Obviously I'm a prolific keynote speaker. And you're starting the presentation and people are not listening to your message, they're trying to figure out whether you're a man or a woman. So it's not the average thing that a woman has to deal with. No. So my voice was always a reminder of my past. And so I can pretty much say I've done the work to say that I'm very proud of this voice, given what it's taken to transcend it. People don't want to hear about what happens in society if it doesn't impact them. So it makes them feel uncomfortable. They feel revolted by it. They feel resistant in hearing it. They think that you're a victim or that you need healing and I go, no, I'm all good. I've done the work. Yeah. So in the vocation that I have, there's not many shoes that I sit in front of that I don't have a in-depth appreciation for what it takes to transform. So I talk about unrecognisable transformation. Most people tolerate not getting transformation, let alone unrecognisable transformation. So in the context of the basis of where my life apprenticeship has been my university.
You're a great example of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, aren't you?
Well, one of my key messages when I keynote is you're never given anything that you can't handle.
Yeah. Now that's very interesting. And we'll just dive into the spiritual just for a second. If we have a journey and there is a lesson to be learned, you've already organised this lesson, haven't you?
Yep.
And you think to yourself, why would I organise a lesson like this? But you have. Any ideas why you would have?
Well, that's a series unto itself. So I believe that the mongrel mob are my spiritual initiators. Had I not have, when you've gone beyond the comprehension of human terror and come back of your own accord, you learn a few things. So the perfection within my life apprenticeship, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today had I not have experienced that. And I am alive today. So there were 2 other women that experienced a similar experience to me. One committed suicide and the other ended up in a mental asylum. I'm very clear I shouldn't be here today. So I talk about fearless practicing, and in leadership, not many leaders would even acknowledge that they're fearful. But my stand is to be able to have this education in the hands of people who are working with the human condition. Counsellors, psychotherapists, doctors, lawyers, coaches, consultants. Because if you don't understand what I term your default identity, the disempowered aspect of yourself, you can't facilitate somebody else's. So I can shift anybody out of a suicidal conversation, anybody out of a depressed state in a very short time frame. So part of my skill, I recently launched in the United States and did 8 hours of live coaching. Throw anything at me, any place, anytime, anywhere, on anything. And within that 8-hour period, even the guy who was filming me said he felt that it was staged because he couldn't believe how fast you could sift people. Because most people, suffering is a function of what they make things mean. And so going back to your original question around spirituality, people confuse the nuances of spirituality. To me, spirituality is about trusting the unknown as much as you trust the known realm. I'll say that again. Trusting the unknown realm as much as you trust the known realm. So within standard leadership, we talk about the 3-legged stool. One leg of the stool is the hard skills, the semantics of most of the leadership providers that are out there. very, very critical from a leadership perspective. Second leg of the stool would be the subject matter expertise. Most leaders are unconsciously competent in that area. Third leg of the stool, which is where we specialise, that nobody globally is focusing on the sustainability element of personal or professional transformation. That if you're going to invest money into change, let's make sure it's sustainable. So the third leg of the stool is the mindset, the soft skills, that usually within leadership is that woo-woo thing on the side, nice to have when you can afford it, or we've got the time, which more often than not is never the case. But if you want to sustain anything, and given my background in sustainable in change management, the key area to sustaining anything, if you're going to invest money into something, is in the soft skills mindset area. If you're human, you have what I term a default identity. So moment by moment, you're either in an empowered state or a disempowered state.
Gosh, that's great, isn't it? Wow. Yeah.
And we have a tendency of defaulting to this disempowered state. So I specialise in this default identity. The formation of that identity came from childhood. So in the study of ontology, the study of what it is to be human, they distinguished that there were 3 incidences in your childhood between the age of 3 to 5, 5 to 12, 12 to 21, and of a negative nature. So regardless of whether you've experienced a traumatic childhood or not, you do not come through childhood unscathed. The irony in 13...
So even the best prepared child with the best parents and the best schools and the best nannies and the best does not come through unscathed.
You'll love this then.
Yeah.
In 13 years of facilitating thousands of conversations with human beings, the most dysfunctional are the people who have experienced far less than those that are warranted to. So I can have somebody who's had their parents die versus somebody who's had their had their parents murdered versus their cat dies. Now the relativity of the experience is relative to the individual, as people have a tendency of doing comparison. Yet the most dysfunctional, it amazes me, comes more from the person who has experienced less than the person who's warranted to experience. So there's the happening and then there's what you do with the happening. So the formation of childhood, when you think about, I talk about default-based cultures versus power-based cultures. So in the context of, I've had some corporates say to me, who are going out there to explore executive coaching, we'll consider you so long as you don't go anywhere near the past with our executives. And I'm going, well, you shouldn't be choosing me because I'm about sustainable change. You need to understand the nuances of the individual's default and then the collective default within your organisation. So most organisations are in a default-based culture versus a power-based culture. So my background's in belief, behavioural, cultural change at a very large level. I was in New York on September the 10th, not realising what was going to happen on September the 11th.
Wow.
So I was working with a group of executives 5 blocks from Ground Zero, and millions of dollars would be spent on these change programs that I would implement, but I knew they'd never get a return on their investment 3 to 5 years after I walked out the door. So I became fascinated about this elusive thing called sustainability. Money going out on consultants, on coaches, on training, but bugger all ROI back into the business.
Yes, exactly.
I'd been a course junkie for 30 years, name a book, a CD, a course. I'd read it, listened to it and been to it, always looking outside of myself for the answers. But I struggled to sustain the change. So part of the reason why I, off the back of my 25-year apprenticeship, decided to create my own education, I was wanting to find a formula
for sustainable change.
For sustainable change.
Because look, it's the same old story. Every New Year's Eve, everybody's going to lose weight. Everybody's going to get on with their wife or husband better, and it's not sustainable, isn't it? So that's a biggie. What you're doing, that's the sustainable change. I don't know how you're going to do it, but tell me how you do it.
Well, we're doing it. Well, I do a lot of reverse psychology.
Yeah.
So example would be, if you're wanting to lose weight, how many times have you been trying to lose weight? 2, 5 or 10 years? Are you wanting to transform your finances? How long have you tried that? 2, 5 or 10 years? You probably live in a conversation called, I hate this, I'm frustrated by it, I don't like it. Well, I'm here to tell you, you love it. You love being fat and you love your finances being stuffed because that validates your default listening of yourself.
Yeah.
What people aren't aware of, so all of the education I've created is awareness-based training.
Yeah.
Buy a car, see the make and model everywhere. Happens very, very fast. Very similar to distinction-based training. That in the moment of insight, a whole new world opens up. So a lot of my practices are unorthodox.
You only see what you want to see, is what you're
That's
saying.
right.
Yeah.
Most people have tried a plethora of management or leadership programs. They've trained in the Anthony Robbins and the landmarks and the avatars, and which are all phenomenal work. But the key missing is they either haven't experienced the level of transformation that they want, or they've not known how to sustain it.
Yeah.
So the fact that so part of the course commitment is that they actually don't divulge what happens on the program, and I believe that's why it's so successful. that I can circumvent 10, 20, 30 years of preconditioning in a 3-day period. Because if you're already highly trained, it's very easy to fast track you. But most people do not look at the areas of their life that are confronting, resistant or uncomfortable. And as a transformation agent or a change agent, that's where you live. Go looking to be confronted. Go looking
to where you live.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. And that's not your physical address, that's where you live in your mind, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you're the only one who has to live with yourself every 24-hour period.
Now, believe it or not, even though it appears that it's not the case, the mongrel mob members, they're also condemned too. Their actions, if you look at their lives following those incidences that they carried out, their lives were stunted as well, weren't they? So is that any...
Well, I think at the end
Can that make you feel a little bit better? If you know, if you look, they'll be older men now, won't they? And they will have, once they got out of that youth enthusiasm, gang-ho, macho bullshit that they get into, they can only look back on their lives with regret too, and they haven't got the education, they haven't got anything to help them through this life either.
Well, I think going back to the conversation I had before about forgiveness, most people's focus is on the perpetrator, whereas I believe that freedom is sought when you realise what you're doing to yourself. And so if you can sleep well at night knowing that you're living true to your values, and then obviously you will have peace. Whatever course of action people have taken in their life, even after the first 60-minute documentary back in 2004, I would have people 2 years after the documentary come up to me asking me, Sally, why aren't you angry? How could you possibly hug that man? And I'm going, first of all, it happened to me. And second, I have no interest, given it took 30 years to come home, to spend time focusing on the perpetrator. I had to focus on myself because I became my own worst perpetrator because I internalized everything through the power of the inner critic, that is another aspect of what I teach people. Who would you be if you never heard that internal dialogue ever again? So mastery of the inner critic, from my perspective, needs to be in the schooling system. A 9-year-old child can have the most powerful inner critic. By the time I see them as a client at 49, 59, to be human is to have an inner critic. Nobody talks about it, yet it annihilates human potential.
It's the elephant in the room all the time.
You got it.
Now, after that experience, if somebody like you are today, the Sally Anderson that you are today, was able to talk to the young Sally Anderson, could you have saved 20 years in the wilderness if you were able to talk to that young Sally Anderson?
Well, we are one of the few coaching organisations globally that are advocates for healing and coaching. So part of the healing work that I've done over the years to fully reintegrate has involved a lot of inner child work, being able to heal the 15-year-old. And healing is a very powerful modality and integral for you to be able to, if a wound isn't healed, it'll always have an impact. So I've done the work, from that standpoint. I just recently flew to Sydney and did a keynote presentation to 280 youth, and they were 16, 17-year-old youth, and it was an extraordinary standing ovation to be in front of these youth. But there was a young youth leader that came up to me after the presentation who had tried to commit suicide 4 weeks earlier, and she said she was just absolutely slam dunked in the presentation because in the area of suicide specifically with youth, and I have a huge issue with reference to the disassociation in this country with our teen suicide rates, that we don't talk about it because of the shame involved. We need to talk about it. So if I talk in front of a youth audience, I go, hands up, everybody's wanted to commit suicide. It's almost like the adults in the back of the room are just going, oh my God. Let's talk about it, because I've been there, and from my perspective, the shame and the not talking about it is why our kids are topping themselves. It's just not okay.
Sally, we've got to go, but it's fascinating.
Thank you very much.
We're going to see you
really
again.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Bye-bye.